Hello everyone, and welcome to Week 4 Unit 3 lecture on data, metadata, file formats and copyrights. The aim of this lecture is to teach you about data from scratch and review the best practices for handling data, which includes what is a file format and choosing the best format for your data, file format, metadata and copyrights. In the previous lectures, we had a look at what is an image, denoising and filtering of images. These will form the basis for this lecture, since throughout the course we have been discussing about images and how to acquire them. In the beginning, imaging an embryo using a microscope was discussed, and throughout we have seen images of zebrafish and mouse. When we refer to data, we shall have this in mind and what other kind of data that we can derive from this. In this lecture, we will cover the following aspects involving data. We will discuss how to define, manage, and choose the correct data and file formats. We will also look at what is metadata to preserve along with the data. And finally, we'll have a discussion on what are copyrights and why it's important when we are dealing with our own data. To put it, the question is, what is data? Data are the raw materials from which you can get information and knowledge. Researchers, regardless of their discipline or locality, have, produce, and need data. The type of information that we learn from data is dependent on the context that we put the data into. For example, consider information like location, spatial resolution, sex, age, and time that a researcher imaging an embryo under a microscope can be interested in. Another researcher can take that data and look at the difference in the field of view, quality between different microscopes, and produce a completely different information from this. Once we have been able to extract information from data, we gain what is called knowledge that is useful in understanding the problem. Example of a knowledge that you can learn when observing data is the life cycle of a zebrafish, from hatching to adulthood. Now we shall have a discussion about the types of data. There are 4 types of data. We have observational, experimental, simulated, and derived data. In the next sections, we shall discuss about each one of these. Observational data. These are data recorded through an occurrence of an event at a specific time or location. They are usually captured in real time and are hard to reproduce. Examples include zebra, fish, and mouse microscopy observations. Experimental data. These are data created from observation and recording from the context of a scientific study. They can be categorized as quantitative, such as numbers, or qualitative, such as color, sex, and they are mostly generated from lab equipment and usually are expensive to reproduce and store. Now we shall define simulated data. These are data that model real-world system in a controlled digital environment. The data is generated from test models such as zebrafish or mouse models, and the inputs are usually the metadata about these test models. Derived data. These are referred as computed data. These are data we compute from other data or defined from test models. As an example, in the previous unit, we had a look at filtration and denoising of image data. These kind of data are reproducible, but that is usually dependent on the software used, the procedure, and the equipment needed to reproduce them. In this part, we shall discuss about forms of data. Each of the data type we have discussed before can exist in several forms. These forms are usually in the form of text data, which are human readable, or in the form of non-text data, which is binary form and cannot be read by humans, but readable by machines. Ideally, we advise to choose a form that is usable and in a common format, not tied to a specific software vendor. Now we'll go to discussing about what is file formats and what are the best formats to use for our data. File formats are standard methods for encoding digital information. We can store our data in various file formats. Examples include formats such as comma-separated values, text files which are ASCII data, images in form of JPEG, PNG, TIFF, audio in form of MP3, video files such as MP4, MOV, documents such as doc or PDF. During the data life cycle, it's important to think and decide the file format before going through the process of acquiring data. This is because such decision will have a big impact in the other stages of data life cycle. The goal is to minimize conversion from one format to another and to minimize the risk from data loss. In this part, we shall talk about the best practices to follow when choosing the file format for our data. First of all, collect data in a file format that is open and non-proprietary to limit the need to convert from one format to another. Second, if you have to use a proprietary format, ensure it can be easily converted to an open and non-proprietary format. Select a format that have a broad use and support in the community you work in. Also, whenever possible, choose a format that is self-describing. Keep in mind of the software, hardware, and the licensing required for viewing and working with the file format you choose. We shall cover more about this when discussing copyrights for data. Remember, it is critical to select a format during data acquisition since it affects the other formats used during the data life cycle. In this part, we shall discuss about the metadata. What is metadata? Metadata gives an in-depth description about the data. Information such as who, what, where, why, structure, and how are recorded so that it makes it easier to understand, reuse, and integrate the data with other data sets. In this part, we shall discuss about the metadata. What is metadata? Metadata gives an in-depth description about the data. Information such as who, what, where, why, structure, and how are recorded so that it makes it easier to understand, reuse, and integrate the data with other data sets. Now we shall discuss about the best practices to follow when creating metadata for your data. A standard metadata should include the following information: keywords, labs or origin of the data, the users who generated this data. If this data was generated by an equipment, the corresponding specification of the equipment used. Also, save the conditions under which the data was acquired. This becomes important if someone else would like to reproduce this data. And finally, give meaningful and descriptive names to the files. Ideally, it should be easy to interpret the file content just from the names. In this final part, we shall discuss about copyrights. What is copyrights? Copyrights are the exclusive right given to the creator of work and protects the expression of idea in the form of creative work. It is important for data to be licensed regardless of whether you are consuming or generating it. Copyrights becomes important when you are sharing your data. And the question is, why should you share your data? When you share your data, it enables others to replicate and verify your results. It also allows researchers to ask new questions, perform new analysis, and improve the existing methods. It's also linking to publications and presentations of this shared data. And more importantly, you can receive credit for the data that you created when you share it. And it makes your work more useful and citable by other scientists. Finally, we shall discuss about licensing of data. This is important when we are sharing our data to the public. When sharing your data, it's advisable to use open licenses for either the data or the software used to create your data. Some of the examples include open licenses for data such as Creative Commons, and if you're sharing your software, we have licenses such as GPL, General Public License, MIT, or BSD. With this, we conclude our discussions about data, file formats, metadata, and copyrights. Thanks for your attention.